April was sitting at a table in a restaurant. Her 3 children were with her parents because she needed time to cool off alone. She was more than a little annoyed and very disappointed. Her husband, Paul, also had to work during the holidays. He already worked a double shift for Thanksgiving because of this stupid COVID thing, and now 3 of his co-workers are sick and their family holidays have been ruined too. Damn fool, she thought. Idiot, with this stupid job. Never home when I need him, always working. Morning, evening, and night shifts. And beyond that, complains because I took the children to celebrate with my parents. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice. Is this place free? April raised her head and saw a handsome dark-haired man in front of her. He smiled and continued. Looks like you need a little cheering up. Am I right? April nodded. She felt a little uneasy that it was so obvious that even a stranger noticed it. The stranger sat down and introduced himself. My name is Charles Marsh. Nice to meet you. Almost automatically, without thinking, April answered, April Fowler. Charles said, Now that the show is over, why are you so gloomy? A few days later, April was waiting in the park. Charles invited her out after she told her story of heartbreak, complaining about Paul always working and never being there. He sympathized with her, looked at his watch and said, Oh, I have to get back to work. Can we do this again? Take a walk in the park, maybe? At first, April was reluctant to meet a stranger, but Charles insisted and she gave in. She now anxiously scanned her surroundings, finally noticing him as he entered the park. Charles smiled when he saw how nervous April was at the agreed-upon seat. He was late on purpose to gauge her reaction. Walking over, he took her hand and kissed it, a little longer than necessary. Let's go for a walk, he asked. When she didn't object, he took her arm. 2 weeks and several meetings later, Charles achieved his goal when they said goodbye after their last meeting. By then, he already had April's phone number and address. He entered her thoughts well. He waited a little to make her think, maybe even miss him. Then the exchange of messages began, at first a simple greeting, and then, as the days passed, more pleasantries and the occasional compliment as the connection he was making strengthened. Saturday evening, a few weeks later. Ping, ping. April looked at her phone and smiled. Hello, beauty. What are you doing? Netflix movie. Is it working again? Yes. COVID. That's what he says. And you carry everything on yourself. He doesn't deserve you. Did you call work? No. For what? Maybe he's busy with other things. I'd call if I were you. Maybe I'll do it. I'll write back later. An hour and a half later, the phone rang to Paul's tune. She picked up the phone. Hello, darling. Did you call? Did something happen? Did something happen to the children? April heard the worry in Paul's voice and felt a little guilty, but he wasn't in the office when she called. She asked, It's okay, I just wanted to hear your voice, but you weren't there. Relief washed over Paul's voice. You scared me. I was on the platform, sorting out a problem with the flight, when I was told through the messaging system that you called, but I didn't have my phone with me. They talked for a minute and hung up. Hi. Took a while to get through to him. And he said why. By the end of this chat session, the seed of mistrust had already been sown next to the tree of dissatisfaction, and it was thriving. In about 3 months, a relieved Cornelius Paulus Fowler, Paul in short, carefully maneuvered his RAV4 through heavy airport traffic. In 5 minutes, he could take the airport service road, which took him to the freeway and home. It was 10 grueling 10-hour night shifts in which bad weather and Murphy's Law played havoc with the daily operations of the airline he worked for. It was his job to prevent or solve these problems, and this time 7 of the 10 shifts were on the brink. Now he was finally relieved by a colleague who had just recovered from COVID, so he could go home early and enjoy a few days off. After another quarrel, April, his wife of 15 years, stayed for a while with her parents in St. Christopher's Crossing. She angrily argued that he was already a mostly absent father when he worked night shifts, so she might like to spend time with her parents. Her father was a retired teacher, so homeschooling was not an issue. He was almost dead on his feet when he opened the front door. Paul hasn't been sleeping well the last few weeks, mostly due to stress. April was constantly grumbling about everything: his job, his income, their car, whatever. It seemed that nothing was valued enough anymore. However, he earned a very decent salary and received good additional compensation for late and night shifts. This was called compensation for inconvenience, and there was a promotion on the horizon, although he kept the latter a secret. It hasn't been decided yet. The house was paid off, as were both cars. When April became pregnant with his eldest daughter, he created an education fund, and now it was large enough for all 3 children to count on it. Although Paul had to drive about 45 minutes to his office at the airport, the family lived in the suburbs next to a nature reserve. The location wasn't really inconvenient. The city center was easily accessible by public transport. The house was also nice, bought by Paul at auction 2 years before he met April. It was big enough for the 5 of them. Plus, there was a spare room because he had converted the attic into a spacious room by building a dormer window on the roof. Next to this room, there was also a utility room with a washer and dryer. The house has been constantly modernized over the years, the latest innovation being solar panels. Paul threw his bag on the table, went into the kitchen, made himself a sandwich, and poured himself a drink. An hour later, he collapsed into his bed and immediately fell asleep. His alarm woke Paul from a restless 3 hours of sleep at 11 a.m. With effort, he climbed out of bed. Immediately, he felt a familiar emptiness in his stomach. His eyes were irritated from fatigue, and he felt hot. Paul knew these symptoms well. It was like jet lag on steroids, and he suffered from it after every series of night shifts. It was only because this time he worked 10 shifts in a row, instead of the usual 4 or 5, that the symptoms struck him with particular force. The only remedy was to wait it out. Today promised to be a beautiful spring day, so he decided to start with a steady jog along the trail. He made himself a cup of coffee and a light brunch, and after eating, he splashed his face with cold water. Putting on his running uniform, he headed straight into the woods. 2 hours later, he returned. Looking at his watch, he thought, 11 miles in 2 hours. Not bad at all. He was happy with this, knowing that he was losing a mile or 2 an hour after night shifts, but his stamina and general condition were improving. He entered the house, took the mail, and went to the shower. Returning from the shower, he began to prepare dinner. Although he was not particularly hungry, the emptiness in his stomach was still there, but he needed to eat. With the plate in hand, he remembered to check his mail. Bills, advertising, garbage. What is it? Paul thought for a moment when he saw the thick, cream-colored envelope with gray trim. Did someone die? He opened it. The world suddenly fell silent and slowly left under his feet as he read the contents. In memory of marriage, my ex-husband and our beloved father, Cornelius Paulus Fowler. Paul. April 21, 2006. March 25, 2022. April Nelson and Charles Marsh. May. Thomas. Lindsay. A brief memorial service will be held on April 1, 2022. At St. Christopher's Court, Pilgrim's Way 7, Hoghampshire. On the front of the card was a picture of a happy family in better times. Paul huddled on the sofa, staring blankly at the funeral card. After a while, he pulled himself together, starting to think again. That's why the cold shoulder, the nagging and derogatory comments, he thought. Now what? Paul felt indecisive and hopeless. The only thing he could think of at the moment was to wait for events to develop and try to decide how to react. Over the next 2 days, his numbness gradually gave way to anger, and Paul knew that if his anger took over, he would not be able to think properly. He made his first decision since opening the envelope. He will return to practicing Tai Chi, the sport he practiced before he married April. April once saw Paul compete and was horrified by the bruises and contusions he received from the blows. She begged him to stop, so with pain in his heart he agreed, like so many other things she demanded. Now he had to learn to concentrate again and find an outlet for his anger before he began to lose control. Paul returned home exhausted from his intense training at the dojo. Noticing the card, he looked at it again, and this brought him out of his lethargy. He decided to check on Charles Marsh, so he turned on the computer. Late that evening and several hours away, April kissed the same man goodbye, unaware that her mother was watching them from the bedroom. June Nelson already suspected that her daughter was on the path to ruining her marriage, and now, to her horror, her suspicions became reality. With a deep sigh, she turned to the bed where her husband Jack was looking at her. I recognized that sigh. What has our daughter done this time? If things work out as they seem, we may soon have a divorced daughter and 3 fatherless children. I'm afraid she's seeing another man and things are picking up steam. So bad, huh? You want me to talk to her, or do you? June replied in a sad voice, I will do it. With your tact, this is mission impossible. The only thing we need to decide is how much pressure we can use. If you can find out this guy's name, I can check his background. As far as pressure goes, she's cheating, so I refuse to support her in a divorce. I'm also not going to pay for her lawyer. She's on her own. I'm not going to force his son-in-law to go through a long heal. He will suffer enough even if there is a chance of reconciliation. June looked a little worried, and Jack quickly continued, No, I won't leave her on the street, homeless. We have grandchildren to think about, but she'll pay rent if she comes here to live. She'll have to find a job here, and the house too, after a while. Their house was bought by Paul before they met. He thought for a moment. There is one more thing that I just thought of. I made Paul and April sign a prenuptial agreement. In case of divorce, everything acquired during their marriage is divided equally. In this case, April's money from your mother cannot be affected, like Paul's house. But, he added, and this is a big but, if someone cheats, the cheater leaves with what he came with, and practically the clothes on his body, with no right to further financial support. The cheater is unlikely will receive children, so there will probably be no child support payments for the traitor. There will be no division of property or money acquired during the marriage. At that time, I never expected April to be the one. Jack left the rest unsaid. June was amazed and asked, Why did you do that? It's pretty cruel. Why and when did you come up with that? To be honest, I didn't trust Paul at all back then. But he convinced me, and now I really like him. He's a good man, and I would really miss him. Paul entered Charles Marsh into an internet search engine and received many results. He started browsing Charles' Facebook page and immediately found a treasure trove of information. Has this guy never heard of privacy settings? Thank you, Lord, he thought silently. There were photos of April and Charles playing happy family with his children. One photo of April and that scoundrel hugging, and many other photos of them together. Shaking his head, Paul quickly downloaded them, along with comments that showed complete disrespect for April's marital status. According to Paul, this man took pleasure in destroying families. The photographs also woke Paul up from his indecision. He was now sure that his wife wanted out of the marriage. It didn't matter whether she actually cheated or not. He would fulfill her wish. The next morning, several things happened simultaneously. Paul received a text message from April. It's spring break, and I decided to stay with my parents for this period. He replied with a text. Okay. I will mourn our marriage in silence. April barely glanced at his answer and did not understand its meaning. Thoughtlessly answered mockingly. Don't be a fool. You will still be absent, perhaps even work. And then she realized, what does he mean by grief? What do you know? Besides, it's just flirting. I'm not taking this man to bed. Bye. But if you act the same way, I might think about it. Paul thought about it. What does she mean by, maybe even work? This is the only thing I do. Nothing more. Paul called his company's legal team and asked if they knew a good family lawyer. Right after April received Paul's response, June and Jack entered the kitchen. They both looked tired and irritated. What's wrong with you? You look like you haven't slept all night. Jack growled before June could say anything. It's your fault it was late last night. Because of you, we have to watch your kids, just so you can hang around after your husband. April was shocked by her father's tone. Dad, what are you talking about? I don't mess around. June decided to intervene before the conversation got out of hand. Don't lie to us, dear. I saw you yesterday with that man. By the way, who is he? In any case, your behavior with this man would absolutely not pass the test of fidelity. April blushed and blurted out, Charles Marsh, and this is just harmless flirting. I have that fool of a husband at work all the time. That's what he says. I think he's the one who's cheating, but I can't prove it, so. Jack snorted and growled. Paul works. Trust me, that's really the only thing he does. Works and takes care of his family, nothing else. That fool, as you call him, is working himself out for you and the kids, and you think that can you flirt because of this? Have you forgotten that in addition to teaching your children while they are here, I am also your accountant? I see his payroll every month. You should have known that he cannot leave the territory without using a pass, and his comings and goings are always recorded by someone. It's on the appendix to his payroll. He's been working an average of 60 to 80 hours a week for the last few months. Why? So you can play housewife and cheat on him. You are crazy, he finished angrily. Again, June intervened. Jack, please. There are kids here too. They don't need to hear all this. Bye. She turned to her daughter and said, when Daddy is busy with the children, you and I will have a long and serious conversation, and I will tell you something from our past, if your father agrees. With that, she looked at her husband. Her husband looked back at her, and April noticed that in that short moment, an entire discussion had taken place and a decision had been made. She wondered how they do it. Can they read each other's minds or something? The next morning, Paul sat in the lawyer's office, waiting for his appointment. His employer entered into an agreement with this law firm, and he was able to quickly arrange a meeting with one of their family lawyers. A beautiful woman approached him and introduced herself as Lydia Coleman. I am Mr. Green's legal assistant. Do you mind if we discuss some preliminary matters before Mr. Green joins us? Paul agreed and followed her into the office. There he laid out everything he had as evidence of his wife's infidelity, including the funeral card that started it all. Lydia excused herself after Paul finished and left the room. Paul's presentation was too close to Lydia's own sins years ago. She still felt enormous remorse and regret for what she had done to her ex-husband. She wiped away her tears, looked in the mirror, and said to herself, "Come on, girl, pull yourself together and help this poor guy." When she calmed down, she reviewed the data Paul had collected and told him that she would call her boss, Ben Green. She worked for Fabian Small, a man who became friends with Isaac Manor, Lydia's ex-husband, in prison. A few years later, Ben offered her a job, giving her a chance to atone for her sins by helping others. It was the best thing that had happened to her since she betrayed her ex-husband. That evening, June told April to sit down. The relationship you see now between your father and me is the result of many years of successful struggle with insecurity. June took a deep breath and continued. What you don't know is that we were both cheaters. Not on each other, you know, but we both ruined our first marriages. April gasped. This was a revelation for her. She always thought that they had no other relationship before they met each other. June continued, I cheated out of pure attraction. When my first husband found out, I used all the excuses I knew, like it was just sex, and it was one time and only one time, but it was all in vain. I lost the man she loved because of her stupidity, too much booze and hormones. She paused for a moment, guilt clearly visible on her face. Then I met your father and seduced him. Your father cheated on his wife with me, and I was fully aware of it. He had to divorce his first love because I became pregnant with his child. By then, I had already destroyed 3 marriages. My own, the marriage of the man I seduced before my ex found out, and your father's marriage. June took a sip of water and continued. Your father's divorce was devastating for both his ex-wife and himself. It took him many years to get over it. However, even now, he continues to monitor her to make sure that she's fine. But that aside, it also took us many years, probably a decade, to regain the mutual trust in each other that you initially had with your spouse before you started cheating. Is lost forever. There's always some doubt that gnaws at you. You see, when you cheat, you don't just cross a threshold, you destroy it. It took me almost 20 years to get over it the second time around. I stopped worrying when your father went out with friends, and I'm sure he had the same doubts. June looked at April seriously and asked, "Now, please tell me it's not too late and you haven't gone through with this man. And remember that your father is testing him right now." April felt many emotions at once: fear, anger, and shock at her mother's revelations, but, foolishly, also relief. It was easier for her that she was caught by her parents and not her husband. If Paul found out, she didn't even dare to think about it. Finally, she said, "I haven't slept with him. Not yet, I have to admit. We met a few months ago when I was at the store, and we immediately struck up a conversation. I suspect he slowly and skillfully destroyed my defenses and penetrated under my protective barriers. I had already texted Paul that I would be staying here for spring break, expecting us to sleep together during that period. But other than hot kisses and Charles groping my breasts through my clothes, nothing happened." She wisely hushed up the fact that the last time she was only walking was a wrought iron blouse, and the bra was in the bag. It took all her willpower not to give in to lust. It had been so long ago that there was a man inside her. Now it was April's turn to gather her strength and think about what and how to say next. Finally, she said, "Charles was subtly putting Paul down and I fell for it. I've been treating Paul like crap for the last few months. I blamed him for working too much and earning too little at the same time. The poor guy had no chance with me at all, not even having a reasonable conversation with me." June felt she understood the message, so she pressured her daughter by saying, "But what are you going to do about it? Either you divorce Paul or you come clean and try to save your marriage. I'm going to tell him or we'll do it, and we'll do it sooner rather than later. This man deserves it, and frankly, mind you, he will get our support, not you." "I know, Mom. Please believe me. You really gave me a reality check." April checked their shared online agenda and said, "I have an idea. I promised the children to go to the zoo tomorrow, so I won't be able to go home tomorrow. However, I just checked his online agenda. Saturday, the day after tomorrow. Paul has the morning shift. If you have children, I can go and surprise him, confess, and I hope I can fix it in bed." The next day, April got up early, getting ready for her trip to the zoo. May, Thomas, and Lindsay were excitedly discussing what to expect and what they wanted to see first. April listened to this with half an ear. She thought hard about what to say to Paul. Even May, at 14, still loved zoos, but on the way to the car, she dropped the bomb. "Mommy, when are we coming home to see Daddy?" "Your father works, so what's the big deal? Not to see him at home or not to see him here?" April responded a little sadly because the question sounded painful. Now Thomas joined the discussion. "Mom, we see Dad all the time. Even when he worked so hard, he was always there for us. Prepared breakfast or lunch. Dinner is always ready, even when he works a late shift. Always there to help us with our homework. He is present at our sporting events. No, May and I are too young for that. May took over, saying, "We can understand Daddy being mad at you, but why are you mad at him?" Now April felt out of place. "Why do you think I'm mad at your father?" she asked. "Come on, Mom," May grinned. "We are young, not stupid, and not blind. We see you being cold towards Dad for I don't know how long, refusing to talk to him. It eats him alive. And for what? Because you think it works too. Or for your friend, that pervert, Mr. Marsh? You know Dad's got a big promotion coming up, right?" April was confused. Obviously, she missed a lot in her refusal to communicate with her husband. "Of course not. How could you? You don't talk to Dad. You just gave orders and ignored everything else," May bit her. April got scared and screamed in panic. "Can we have a good day at the zoo? Or should I turn back?" May whispered to her brother in a low voice. See, she did the same thing to Daddy every time he wanted to talk to her. Eventually, he just gave up. Thomas just nodded to his sister, and April, now extremely upset, drove, white-knuckled on the steering wheel, to the zoo. The only one who was happily oblivious to this was 6-year-old Lindsay. In the end, the day at the zoo was a resounding success with the kids, but not with April. Charles texted her, and the messages gradually became more demanding, and he wanted her to call him. Finally, she had enough of the harassment and wrote him a sharp reply saying that she was entertaining her children, and when the time came, she may or may not respond to his messages. After that, the phone finally went silent. Returning home, Jack pulled a sleeping Lindsay out of the car. Lindsay got out of the car, and all four of them entered the house. June was cooking something light for dinner. Nothing serious, just a light snack with lots of vitamins to compensate for the fast food eaten during the day. April sat down, taking the pressure off her legs, thinking about Paul and when she last heard from him. She realized it was after her sharp response to his last message. "Okay? I will mourn our marriage in silence." At that moment, she was interrupted by the doorbell. "I will open it," she said and sighed, getting up from her chair. In front of her stood a young man in uniform, with a video camera on his body and a thick envelope in his hands. "I need to talk to Mrs. April Fowler," he said in a surprisingly deep voice. "It's me," she replied. "How can I help?" "Yes, I need to hand this to you, but before I can do that, I need some form of identification." "Just a minute." April returned and took her driver's license out of her purse. "Here you are." The young man examined the license, pointed a video camera at them, handed her an envelope, and said, "You have been handed it, madam. Have a good evening." He walked away muttering, "Well done." April was stunned. Delivered? With what? She thought naively. She opened the seal on the plain envelope. First, a letter fell out of it. "April, the way you confronted me with the end of our marriage was cruel beyond words. I should have realized earlier that something was wrong when you stayed with your parents more and more often, not wanting to talk, and began to humiliate me. You have already decided not to invest in our relationship. If you had the decency to talk to me and tell me you want to get rid of me, I would agree and the divorce would be amicable. But not now. I demand paternity tests for our children and call for full enforcement of the prenuptial agreement your father forced us to sign. Against my principles, I created a Facebook account and found ample evidence of your infidelity, well documented by your lover. Thank him for this from me, okay? Now practical. You can't come into my house anymore. I changed the locks. You can come and pick up your things after one of your parents makes an appointment with me. I don't want to see or hear you yet. Your April Fool's joke about our marriage being buried was too humiliating and cruel beyond comprehension. If the children are truly mine, I hope we can come to a mutually satisfactory agreement. Paul." April screamed as she finished reading the letter. At that moment, Jack walked in, deep in thought, muttering, "Charles Marsh." It was easy. He left a trail of broken marriages. If you check his Facebook page, He's even proud of it, and you're a prominent figure in the latest entries. Looks like he made his hobby of ruining marriages, and he is very successful at it. I'm afraid he was trying to convince you that Paul's income is meager. I found out what he does and found out that his company hires him for barely half of his salary. What Paul brings home without even paying for the inconvenience. This man is a fraud. Jack came out of his thoughts when he heard April scream. He noticed an envelope, some photos taken from a Facebook page he had just visited, and other documents. It was all scattered on the floor next to his very, very sad daughter. June ran into the room and saw the documents. No, no, no. It's not what it seems. Please, God, don't let this happen, she begged when she saw the divorce and division of property lawsuit. Jack pulled the letter out of April's hands and read it with June. June turned to April angrily. What did you do to him? What did you do to make Paul refuse all contact and demand a paternity test? Thus cornered by her mother, and having never seen her so furious, April screamed in panic. I didn't do anything. I didn't tell Paul anything that I wanted a divorce. I don't want a divorce. I admit I was stupid, but I wanted to go home tomorrow and talk to him. I wanted to admit what I did and ask for his forgiveness. April collapsed into a chair and looked ahead, seeing nothing. Suddenly, she came to her senses. No matter what he wrote, I'll talk to him tomorrow. I know I acted like a witch and was unreasonable and derogatory, but I never joked or told him I wanted a divorce. Jack, June, and April discussed how best to approach Paul. They agreed that if April went alone, she wouldn't stand a chance. The next day. Why are Saturday morning shifts always so hard? Paul thought. Of course he knew the answer, but it surprised him every time on Saturday. He put on his raincoat. Some time ago he was talking to a colleague, and the woman said she needed 40 minutes. By bike instead of 50 or 60 by car. Paul liked the idea of getting out of the car and getting more physical activity, so he decided to see if there was a viable route for cycling to work. Returning home after night shifts was dangerous. He almost fell asleep while driving. On the freeway twice. On the internet, he found himself a used, but in excellent condition, Randonneur bicycle. Since he bought it, he has ridden his bike to work every day and has felt much better. Putting on his raincoat, he reflected on his nearly consummated marriage and how his divorce papers had been received in the Nelson household. He shrugged, wiped away a tear, and began pedaling through the cold and rain. Almost home, he took the path that ran along the back of the house, so he never noticed the lone figure sitting on his porch. Inside, he took off his raincoat, placed his shoes under the central heating radiator, and made himself comfortable in his tracksuit. Just when he was about to check the mailbox, he noticed someone sitting on the doorstep. He opened the door, and the man turned to him. With her teeth grinding against the cold, June said, "Paul, can I come in? I need to go to the bathroom, and I'm so cold." Paul immediately jumped up to help her up and walked her, while she leaned heavily on him, into the bathroom. He then went upstairs to draw a hot bath, and after she relieved herself, he carried her upstairs. "Can you handle it, or do you need help getting into the bath?" "I'll try and call if I need help," June answered. "Do it. I'll find you something warm to wear. Where's your phone? You can't go home tonight, so you'll use the guest room. I don't want Jack to worry, so call him and tell him. I'll be downstairs preparing dinner." Feeling relieved to plunge into the warm, but not too hot water, June began to feel better. She was distantly reminded of Paul's concern as he almost dragged her, wet and trembling, inside. She remembered how he carried her up the stairs because she could hardly walk. She dozed off for a bit until she realized with horror that she had a mission to complete. Between getting out of the bath and drying herself off with the towel Paul had left for her next to the bathroom door, she thought, damn what April was thinking, pushing away this caring and loving man. How can I convince him that she made a mistake, stepped over the line? but never fully crossed it. And what is this April Fool's joke about burying their marriage? That's the first question I'll ask. In the bedroom, she found panties, a merino wool shirt, a sweater and sweatpants that Paul had left behind. She was amazed at his foresight. The panties would fit, but the rest, she was sure, were Paula's. While April always dressed smartly and was very self-conscious, so that her clothes were always chosen for appearance and comfort was left far behind. Paul didn't care what he looked like at home as long as it was comfortable. June hung her bra up to dry and got dressed. Despite the warm bath, she felt a little out of place, so she thought about how to approach the topic of Paul's divorce suit and what he wrote about the April Fool's joke. As ready as she was, she pulled herself together and went to look for Paul. He was waiting for her in the living room. On the table was a laptop, several printouts of very incriminating screenshots, and a beige envelope. He asked, "Why didn't you wait in the car? Why did you allow yourself to get wet and cold?" June modestly replied, "Because I was afraid that you would slam the door on me before I could say a word. So you should have at least listened to me while we were inside. I assume you didn't come to pick up April's things. You want to see if you can make peace between us, don't you?" June was surprised by Paul's insight, bowed her head, and confirmed, "I thought so. I have a problem with this now. April was angry at me for completely disappearing for long periods of time, and she was right. If she had talked to me and been a little more patient, she would still be married right now. The difference is that she would be married to the head of the department where I work. No more night shifts, no more evening shifts, and once a month a weekend shift from 10 to 6. And the salary I'm starting with is more than my current salary, including inconvenience pay. But every attempt to talk to her was shot down before it even began." June felt as if the ground was slowly moving away from under her feet, but after a moment she regained her balance. The consequences of his words were clear. She had a job to do. Inwardly, she admired her son-in-law, knowing that he could be as straight as a bulldozer, but with her, she tried a different approach. "You're not angry, you're seething. This is not the Paul I know. Those photos, yes, I saw the examples that you sent with the lawsuit, made you angry, but what made you decide to divorce?" Paul, without a word, handed her the envelope that she had already noticed when she entered the room. She took it, but was interrupted by a coughing fit. Paul looked at her, his concern showing on his face as he remarked, "You're not okay, are you? How long did you sit in front of the house?" June coughed. "I don't know, but I really feel bad right now. I think I have a fever, but first I'll watch this." She read the card and felt Paul's pain as if she had experienced it herself. She whispered, "Oh, Paul, I'm so sorry. We didn't raise her that way. This goes beyond disrespect. When I get back, I'll slap her." She coughed again, and that made Paul put his hand on the back of her head, just like he'd learned from his sister when his little nephew was sick. "You have a fever. I'll help you lie down and call the doctor." Paul lifted June from the seat and carried her upstairs. Once she was in bed, he found a thermometer. Fortunately, at April's insistence, they bought an ear thermometer, which eliminated much of the inconvenience and allowed them to get an accurate result in a few seconds. "Damn it," he exclaimed. 104F. Paul called the medical center. It took some convincing, but the argument that the temperature had risen so quickly made them agree that a doctor would arrive soon. Since the clinic was nearby, the doctor, who introduced herself as Dr. Satapathy, arrived within 15 minutes. Paul let her in and showed her upstairs, where he had already placed a wet towel on June's hot forehead shortly before the doctor arrived. Paul noticed that she was very young for a doctor, no older than himself, 39 years old. She turned around and said, "Can you leave us alone? I need to examine this woman." To which June replied hoarsely, "No, he will stay. I don't care, and he needs help lifting me up." "Okay, doctor, tell me what to do." "First, please call me Amber, and I need you to help me strip her to the waist. I need to examine her body and listen to her lungs." Paul replied, "Wait a minute, I'll find something warm for her shoulders." He left the room and returned with a down sleeping bag. As they undressed June, Paul noticed how much his wife looked like her mother. He felt sad as he thought about how he had always expected to grow old with April. After the examination, Amber said that she suspected acute pneumonia and that June should be further examined in the hospital. June categorically refused to go to the hospital, asking Amir to take blood tests to make sure and prescribe the appropriate medications. Prescriptions in hand, Paul immediately went in search of a pharmacy that was open at the time, while Amir stayed with June. He soon returned with antibiotics, cough medicine, and Tylenol. He had enough of the latter at home, but he bought more just in case. When Amir left with a promise to check on June the next morning, Paul called his father-in-law's house. April answered the phone first and saw that it was Paul calling. She answered the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hey, Paul, you're calling late." "April, I need Jack. Wake him up if you need to." Slightly dazed and very disappointed, April handed the phone to Jack, who was standing behind her. It was quiet for a minute. "Got it. I'll head out right away. See you in 3 hours. I need to pack some things." Jack turned around and said to April, "Your mother has caught pneumonia. Paul has arranged for a doctor and has already bought medicine. Now he needs me to bring her some clothes. And tomorrow morning, when Paul has his last shift of the morning, I have to take care of her." "I'll go with you," April said hastily, without thinking about the children. But his last morning shift, like this? Before she could ask, Jack replied, "You can't," and when he saw April looking at him with a blank look, he continued, "First of all, there are children here, and second of all, he doesn't want you in the house, remember?" "I understand, children, but this is also my home. He cannot deny me entry." "Maybe. It's his because it was his before your marriage. It's also in the prenuptial agreement, and you're separated from the moment the papers were handed to you." Realizing the seriousness of her situation, April felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I'll help you pack your things." After Jack left, April sat down to assess the situation she found herself in with a husband so angry with her that he filed for divorce. She realized that she had treated him very poorly in recent months and tried to remember how it all started. A little self-reflection led her to the moment of her meeting with Charles. From the moment they met, April, already dissatisfied, began to distance herself from her husband. After the meeting, Charles slyly and carefully pushed her to increase the distance between them even more. She mercilessly analyzed what he did and her role in this dirty business, coming to the conclusion that Paul was right. Although she was glad that she had not yet crossed the last line with Charles, although he had strongly insisted, she also realized that her behavior had already seriously violated the marriage vows. The question remained, how did Paul find out about her budding romance? She didn't know the answer, but she knew what she had to do. At first, she decided to get rid of Charles Marsh, silently deciding before writing him a furious message expressing her new opinion of him. However, she decided to wait to send, hoping that her parents would be able to find out what exactly finally and irrevocably pushed Paul to divorce. Jack arrived at his son-in-law's house and kissed his wife's hot forehead. The paracetamol helped a little and June was glad to see her husband, but soon fell back into a feverish sleep. With June gone, Jack went downstairs while Paul tried to get some sleep since he had to be at the airport at 6 a.m. Jack saw that the table was cluttered, so he began to clean up, putting away prints and papers, but then he found a card and his breath caught in his throat. Without thinking, he picked up the phone and called April. "Dad, did something happen to Mom? Why are you calling so late?" "April, I'm going to send you a photo of what I found here. I demand an explanation. By the way, your mother is very sick, but she is stable. The doctor will see her tomorrow morning. By then, the antibiotics should be starting to take effect." Without adding a word, he broke the connection, thinking before I lost my temper. April heard the sound of a message arriving, and, as she opened the file, she felt the remnants of her life disappear from underneath her. She sank heavily back onto the pillows. Now I understand how Paul found out. This scoundrel. My behavior had brought our marriage to the brink, but this card could only have come from Charles. He just blew it up with this card. How can I fix this? I told Charles I would never leave Paul. I just wanted comfort and support. Could I have been any more stupid? Then she panicked. She loved Paul for everything he was, a wonderful father, a good provider, and he loved her to pieces. Over the past months, she somehow forgot about it and destroyed her marriage. It is highly doubtful whether they could have reconciled if Paul had found out about her adventures without Charles sending this card. But the card was like a death sentence, just as the marriage contract was very disastrous. She supposed that her father had never foreseen that his daughter would end up on this side. She has lost everything except her children, and what will she tell them? The older two are old enough to explain things to them, but Lindsay will be devastated. This snake deliberately destroyed my marriage, and I fell for the bait. The terrible thing is that it was possible. He could lure me, but what he did to Paul, he will get what he deserves. That's for sure. She called Jack. Dad, please believe that I have nothing to do with this card. I would never agree to something like that. She listened to what her father told her, and she was not happy about it. Her father was right, of course. She should have seen through Marcia's manipulations. After a long conversation on the phone with his father, they finally disconnected. Later that week, smiling, Charles said when he finally spoke to April on the phone, "Glad you called. How are you?" April wasn't playing when she answered, "Unfortunately, not very well. My parents found out about us and definitely don't approve. Now my mom is sick. Pneumonia. This infection is hard to fight with antibiotics. She's partially resistant to them." Charles didn't care that her parents found out, but as usual, he had his own plans. He wanted to know more about April's mom to try to put a wedge between her daughter and her parents. He asked smoothly, "Pneumonia? Where the hell did it get it?" "Wet and cold, waiting for someone to come home. But that's not why I called. I need to see you. When can you?" Charles's heart began to beat. "Of course. Is Wednesday okay? Shall I pick you up?" "And upset my parents again?" "No, meet me at Maggie's Grill. At noon? For lunch." Charles was convinced that everything was going according to his plan. "Another week, and she will be on my back with her legs spread," he thought enthusiastically. The next day, June's fever subsided, and she quickly began to return to life. She immediately began a campaign to prevent divorce. She knew she had a lot of influence over Paul, but was hesitant to use it. This time, however, she wanted to take it to the extreme that Paul would allow. Paul laughed loudly at her first attempt. "June, please, don't get me wrong. I really love you and I understand what you're trying to do. But don't you think this is something between April and me? You realize she still hasn't tried to contact me, and I haven't seen the kids since." June looked a little guilty. She really did a lot of things, didn't she? All because she was stupid enough to believe the hints of that march. Paul looked sad, saying, "It's my fault too. I worked too hard, partly because of the circumstances, partly because I knew I was being considered for a promotion. I would have told April, but when she was home, I couldn't get a word in edgewise. I couldn't do anything right. I worked too hard, but I wasn't a good enough provider." Jack chimed in. "And suddenly you receive a funeral card announcing the death and funeral of your marriage, with the name of April's self-proclaimed lover. I understand very well where your anger is coming from. When we caught April kissing that man late in the evening. The next morning we both told her what we thought, and we weren't too gentle." Paul said thoughtfully, "Anyway, she cheated. I can't live with it. She'd never complained to me about me working too much before until the pandemic hit, and I warned her we were in for some tough times. I tried my best for our marriage. How can I trust a woman who throws herself into another man's arms when things get tough? We both made the same promise to take care of each other, forever, in good times and bad. June and Jack winced. Paul hit the nail on the head, and they weren't always the perfect example of marital fidelity. June tried to take a different course. It really depends on how you define cheating. I know for sure that what April did would never pass the spouse test. I had an intense one-on-one conversation with her. During this, she assured me that they didn't sleep together. They kissed, and he groped her breasts. Oh, is that all? So I went too far? And the constant quarreling of the last months and derogatory remarks. Snoring when I tried to explain something to my children. It's all because of my overactive imagination. Is that what you're trying to tell me? Paul said in a voice that could stop an avalanche. June screamed, "Oh, please, Paul. No, that's not what I meant at all. And you're absolutely right. She treated you horribly. I was just trying to say they didn't have sex." Jack intervened, trying to prevent the situation with Paul from completely escalating. "Paul, we're not going to blackmail you with think about the kids and all that stuff. But please give yourself time. Cool down a little, and then please look into your heart. April and you belong together." "I'm sure April will disagree," Paul quipped. "Well," Jack replied quickly, "that's where you're wrong. She already knows Marsh sent that card, and she was terrified. She never intended to leave you, that's for sure. So, I'm good enough to provide a good life, but for the fun and adventure, she was looking for another partner." June flared up. "Now you are unreasonably angry." Paul was also starting to get impatient. He tried to calm down, breathing deeply. Jack and June looked at each other. Both noticed his effort, and June began to fear that she would go too far. "I'm not unreasonably angry. I'm in a crazy situation. I haven't been able to do anything right for the last few months. Suddenly, I'm faced with the fact that she's seeing another man, and it looks like I'll be replaced in the near future and lose my kids in the process. God knows April has been telling the kids about her dissatisfaction with me. She's already started poisoning them against me. So don't tell me that I'm the one who's in the worst situation. I'm the one who gets the hits. And if I start doubting the good intentions of my almost ex-wife now that she's caught, am I being unreasonable? Let's find out, okay?" Jack suddenly said after an uncomfortable silence and desperately trying to find a way out of this situation. "Let's find out what?" "What April told the kids." Paul looked at his father-in-law skeptically, but June noticed and intervened. "Jack, put her on speakerphone. I can tell when she's avoiding the truth. Tell her she's on speakerphone. Paul is listening. And if she tells a lie, her marriage is over. Only the absolute truth will pass." April answered the phone immediately. "Hey, Dad, how's Mom doing?" June herself answered, "I'm better. The fever has gone down, but I'm still weak. By the way, Paul is listening too. We have a few questions for you." On the other end of the line, April's hope flared. She immediately responded, "Hey, Paul, I love you. I was so stupid, and I'm so sorry for what I did to you." Paul didn't say anything, but June noticed a single tear in the corner of his eye. God bless. He is angry as hell, but he still loves this stupid daughter of mine. There is hope. Jack asked, "What did you tell the kids about the upcoming divorce?" They heard April choke and said in a concerned voice, "When we were driving to the zoo, May asked when we were going home again because they were missing Paul. I asked them what the difference was, since he was never home anyway. Thomas talked some sense into me, and they both took your side, Paul. Do you know how hard it is when two teenagers almost gang up on you? Anyway, I lost control and threatened to go home. Then May tore my soul out by telling Thomas, see, she did the same thing to Dad every time he wanted to talk to her. He finally gave in." They heard April sob into the phone before she continued. "Mom, after your motherly conversation with me, I realized that I was wrong. But it was after that comment from May to her brother that I realized how wrong I was. I did not tell the children about the divorce yet, but they already knew something was seriously wrong and also concluded that I created this mess. I'm so sorry I stupidly ruined my marriage like an angry child, and I don't know how to fix it. I'm sorry, she said with a sob in her voice. It was obvious that Paul did not want to be part of this call, and the silence became awkward very quickly. Until June, I had an idea. April, what are you going to do about the kids' wishes? Paul already told me he misses them a lot. Paul's head shook, and he asked in a whisper, "What are you doing?" June smiled sweetly and answered in a whisper, "Back to the children where they belong. Here, trust me." Paul was stunned and simply nodded in agreement. June replied to April, "Any ideas, April? Children, besides their father, also need their school and friends. Otherwise, this will quickly become a very unhealthy situation for them." April thought quickly and said, "I can bring them to Paul, but they can't stay long because he works all the time." June smirked as she countered, looking at Paul as she did so. "So Paul needs a nanny, or their mother needs to take care of them when he's not around." Paul felt the trap slam shut. He looked at June warily and really started to get annoyed. He felt like he was backed into a corner. June held her breath. She noticed that this did not have a very good effect on Paul. She could read him like an open book. She squeezed his hands. This stopped Paul momentarily from getting too angry and being completely uncooperative. After a pause, he muttered, "I don't like it, but I'll think about it." The other three breathed a sigh of relief. June's idea was on the verge of blackmail. Now June had the opportunity, but they would have to wait for Paul's decision. In any case, I still have time to work on Paul if he agrees, April thought. When the call ended, Paul sarcastically asked, "Isn't it time for you to go home? If, of course, you feel well enough to travel." June and Jack were shocked, torn from their little bubble of satisfaction. "Do you want us to leave? Now?" "Tomorrow morning. You outwitted your greeting. I will not be forced. I will not be blackmailed, even if my children loom in front of me like carrots in front of my nose." A deep sense of loss and remorse overwhelmed June, and she began to sob. Soon the sobs turned into full-blown crying. "No, no, Paul, please. I'm sorry. I want you and April to be together as a happy family. I never meant to blackmail you into staying with April against your will. It humiliates all of us, especially I tried to give you quality time with May, Thomas, and Lindsay while April had a chance to improve, and I saw the perfect opportunity for this. Please, Paul, do not close yourself off from us in your mental fortress." She said all this in one breath, and after that she lay down coughing, gasping, and sobbing in her chair. Jack hugged her and looked at Paul with pleading eyes. Paul was shocked by this sight. "I'll think about it, like I said, but your presence and June's pressure are not helping. Tomorrow is my last morning shift. I need to hand over cases before I start a new job. Go home, take the keys with you, and I'll give you no." After a terrible night of mental anguish and anxiety, Paul got up around 4:30 a.m., made coffee, breakfast, and, since he hated the food served at the airport restaurant, lunch for himself. He made his decision and was contemplating how to tell his father-in-law and April when he heard a quiet noise behind him. He turned around and saw an exhausted June. "What are you doing on your feet? You look terrible." "I couldn't sleep. My mind was spinning. I put too much pressure on you for what I so selfishly wanted, and now—" June left the sentence unfinished. "You made me think, June. You held a mirror up to me, making me realize that what applies to April applies to me, in good times and bad. It's a bad time, a very bad one, I'm convinced, but I have to try. Leaving without trying would be as stupid as what April did." June started to speak, but Paul raised his hand. "But I'm begging you, don't tell her I said that. Divorce papers aren't that easy to get annulled. So when you get home, give April the keys and tell her she can come back after the holidays, he stressed. My other reason is that I really want to see my kids. I'll see if we can reconnect. I think I need this time while they're back to get rid of a lot of anger. And tell her that, for now, she will use the spare room. June staggered up to him and hugged him. My daughter has no idea what a good man she is, but I will definitely tell her. I promise. June gently ran her hand over his cheek. Then go, otherwise you'll be late for the last shift. Charles entered Maggie's grill with a flourish. He looked around and noticed April sitting at a table against the wall. For the last time, she chose a corner. Maybe she found out about the card I sent to the soon-to-be cuckolded man. He walked over, inhaled the scent of her neck, and whispered, "You are beautiful, you know?" There was no reaction from April. She just looked at him and said, "We'll have lunch, and after lunch, we'll take a walk in the park. We'll talk there." "I don't like the way you talk to me," Charles said indignantly. "Bad luck. You'll get an idea of what my husband endured for months." They dined in silence. Charles mentally went through different scenarios and how to deal with them. He wanted April badly. April was a serious conquest, and he spent a lot of time trying to get her into bed. Anything less would have satisfied him. April had completely different plans. When June and Jack returned home, they had a long and very serious conversation in which June, Jack, and April bared their souls. June was still trembling from the pressure she had put on Paul and his initial reaction. They almost lost him then. April told them that she had one last meeting with Charles to face his malicious machinations to destroy her marriage, and she wanted him to pay for it. June and Jack were categorically against it, but April was adamant. In the end, Jack gave her a small tape recorder and told her to put it in her bag, saying, "If Paul finds out that you met with this man after he let you back, you shouldn't even try." When lunch was over, April simply took her jacket and walked outside, leaving Charles to pay the bill. Charles could not do otherwise. He paid and ran after April. When he caught up with her, she was already halfway to the park entrance. April had a mission and a plan. Leaving the restaurant without paying, usually the one who paid for the meal, gave her time to activate the recorder, but this was also done to anger Charles. "Damn it, what's wrong with you? You can't just leave like this." He was out of breath after a short run. April thought, Paul wouldn't be out of breath chasing me. Damn, how could I not notice this? As soon as they entered the park, she found a spot at an ice cream stand and sat down on a bench. Charles immediately leaned on her, but she loudly stopped him. "Don't touch me." This was not what Charles expected, who was already excited, thinking that the main prize was almost in his hands. April rummaged through her bag and pulled out a printout. She printed out the screenshot. "Explain it," she demanded. Charles looked at it and said, "Your marriage to that fool has been in the works for a long time, so I forced him to make a decision and show him who the new man in your life is." "And who told you that you are the new man in my life?" "I definitely didn't say that." He was clearly a skilled manipulator. Now to the point, April thought. "No, I needed comfort, not a broken marriage. I'm here to tell you that this will end now and that we can't see each other anymore. I'm going to save my marriage that you almost destroyed with your illusions." Like a leaf turning, Charles suddenly showed his true nature. He said mockingly, "Oh no, you're not getting off that easy. Your marriage is hanging by a thread. You'll do what I say or I'll cut that thread." "Blackmail? Are you trying to blackmail me? Is that what turns you on? And what do you want me to do to prevent you from cutting?" April asked, a coldness creeping into her voice. "How should I put it? Yeah, you'll satisfy my needs, my sexual needs, and when I think you've properly satisfied them and I'm done with you, I might show some leniency and not tell your husband that you were with me in the park. The story of your conciliatory conversation will probably overshadow it, won't it?" "How can he be so stupid?" Does he really think that after that postcard, Paul won't check everything and find out about him, including his Facebook messages? Why does he think he can force me to serve him when I already know he only wants to destroy my marriage? April thought as she surveyed the area. I'm glad I chose this place. Secluded enough to lure him into a false sense of security, but in full view of the security camera at the ice cream stand. Charles interpreted April's silence as surrender. Inwardly, he exclaimed victory, consuming his next victim with his gaze. April was dressed in a thin knitted dress that hugged her figure like a second skin. He saw that she was wearing a bra underneath, but this underwear hid almost nothing. Her breasts swayed under the fabric of the dress. Charles found this extremely erotic. Confident that he had April cornered, he grabbed her. "Keep your dirty hands to yourself," April shouted angrily, reaching into her bag. Now that he felt her breasts again, he went blind with passion and growled, "Oh no, I will get what I want from you, and nothing will stop me. You will open your legs for me. Willingly or otherwise, I will destroy your marriage." His other hand squeezed between her legs and moved upward. April again ordered him to remove his hands, but to no avail as Charles continued to advance using his weight. April had enough. With one hand trying to fend off Charles's attack, the other holding a can of pepper spray, she pointed it, pressed once, and pulled away, facing the other way. Howling, Charles released her, and April immediately rose to her feet, taking a few steps back. Despite the almost paralyzing burning sensation in his nose, Charles also jumped to his feet and was about to rush after her. He screamed at her, "You'll pay for this. I'll get you, and I won't be gentle. I'll tear you apart." He took a step towards her, raising his hand to hit her as April gave him a second round of pepper spray, this time hitting him square in the eyes. At the same time, her right foot hit him hard between his legs. He bent over, falling to his knees while he was still screaming, only now not in anger. For good measure, April raised her knee hard and hit him in the face. This was more than Charles could bear. He collapsed to the ground and remained there, groaning from the pain that forcefully broke through the adrenaline barrier. With watery eyes due to the dispersion of the spray, April thought contentedly, self-defense lessons from Paul came in handy. What did he always say? When your opponent is stronger than you, fight dirty. It couldn't get dirtier than that, she supposed. Snarkily, she said, "Now the playing field is leveled. You better stop bothering me, because you won't like the consequences," and walked towards the ice cream stand. "It was quite a show, madam," said the owner, handing her a glass of tea to take away. April nodded, appreciating the compliment. "Can I have a copy of this security camera footage, just in case this guy wants to set me up in some other way? The recording is saved on a flash drive. If you promise to reimburse me for the cost of the drive, you can take it. Deal. I have a spare one for now." April handed the $20 bill to the woman. "It's enough?" she asked. The ice cream saleswoman returned one bill. "Tea is at my expense. For the performance, thank you." April smiled and handed the bill back. "No, thank you. You may have saved my marriage." Shaking from the adrenaline rush and subsequent crash, she headed out of the park and walked home with the flash drive in her pocket. On Thursday afternoon, Paul was riding his bike home. Weekend, he sang to himself. One great long weekend, and many more to come. His new job started well. Colleagues were very happy to have him as a manager, saying they finally had someone who knew what they were doing after he had an introductory conversation with everyone. Paul told them honestly that his loyalty now lay with the department, not just the people who worked in it, and so sometimes he would have to tell them things they wouldn't like. He offered training to some of his former colleagues to improve their careers. He told two of them that they should work better, and offered one a language course. The woman was from mainland Europe, but did not speak English well enough to reach her potential. Her knowledge and skills were above average, but her lack of knowledge of the language hindered her. Now he was heading towards his first free weekend, and he was going to see his children for the first time in a long time. April would be back too, but he thought he should just accept it and give her the opportunity to take steps to save their marriage. After all, he had tried long and hard to save him, while she was the one lighting the fuse of destruction. As soon as he arrived home, he changed into his casual workout clothes and started preparing dinner. While he was cooking, he also started cleaning the house before the doorbell rang. He opened the door and was faced with the sight of two police officers. "Good afternoon. My name is Officer Johnston. Are you Cornelius Paul Fowler?" It had been a long time since Paul had heard his full name, and hearing it from a police officer didn't bode well. "Yes, it's me. Did something happen? To my children or my wife?" Paul asked worriedly. "To our knowledge, no. We are here to arrest you on a charge of felony assault on Charles Marsh," the officer responded. "What?" was Paul's only answer to this accusation. "We need you to come to the police station for questioning." "I need to save dinner. Do you have a minute?" "Of course, sir. You have 5 minutes before the officer behind you comes to get you." Returning to the kitchen, Paul called Jack in desperation. "Jack, I'm being arrested for assaulting that bastard Marsh. Please help." "What? Where are they taking you?" "I don't know. They said to the police station." "Okay, don't worry. I'll figure something out." When Jack turned around, he saw April in front of him, who said, "Dad, it was Paul, wasn't it? What happened?" Jack answered carefully. "He was arrested for assault. They say he abused that Marsh." April turned pale. "No, it was me. First he tried to blackmail me, and when that didn't work quickly, he tried to have sex with her. I used some of the tricks Paul taught me. The damn thing is trying to blame Paul for this." Jack was stunned. "Can you prove it?" April frowned and said, "Remember that recorder you gave me? I recorded it. And I have CCTV footage of the ice cream stand. Sight and sound. I'm going to report him for harassment." "What about Paul?" asked her father. "Him first. I'll go and tell you everything. I need to pack a few things. I don't think I'll be back tonight." Meanwhile, Paul was processed at the station. They took fingerprints, took photographs, took DNA samples, and so on. Finally, he sat in front of the detective. "What can you tell me?" the man asked rudely. Paul was seriously annoyed now. He was treated like a piece of meat, only to be told that he was under arrest for attacking Marsh. It occurred to him that making him angry and thus throwing him off balance was a tactical move, so he gritted his teeth and asked, "Can I quote parts of the Bible to you? Otherwise, I have no idea what you are talking about or where my lawyer is." "One more question. Do you have an alibi?" Paul winced mockingly and began to doubt the mental abilities of the man at the table. He answered with icy irony in his voice, "An alibi for when and what? You are conducting an interrogation without the presence of a lawyer. Isn't this a violation of the rights of your victims?" "Everything has its time. Now explain to me why you beat my friend Charles Marsh," asked the detective, not realizing that he had made a serious mistake by revealing the victim's name and, worse, by calling him a friend. "It's all clear to me now. You're a member of the Marriage Buster Club, and your buddy has met a little justice for it. If you find whoever did this, tell him. I'd like to congratulate him or her. Now where's my lawyer? Do I need to file a complaint? Are we going to play hardball? Do you know who you're dealing with?" The detective responded sharply, trying to intimidate Paul into submission. "You're absolutely right, and I know exactly who I'm dealing with. I just can't say it out loud because it would be an insult to a police officer, wouldn't it?" Angry, the man stood up and called another officer, telling the woman to lock Paul up. As Paul was taken out of the cell, he noticed that the clock was about 4 hours late. The next thing he noticed was that Lydia Coleman and Ben Green were arguing heatedly with the sheriff, and a very agitated April was sitting on a bench against the wall. The sheriff looked at Paul annoyed and said to Ben, Here he is. Are we done? Absolutely not. First, the record of his arrest must be erased from your system as it will interfere with future review of his security clearance. Second, this woman here has information and will be filing charges against Charles Marsh, who is falsely accused by my client. I will also advise my clients to file complaints against your officer and you as his superior. The sheriff's face turned red, but he knew of the lawyer's reputation. His predecessor ended up in prison thanks to this man and his friends. He knew a complaint would be filed, but he could limit the damage by erasing the file. He forced them to witness the removal. It was late at night when April drove Paul home. Before he left, April said, "I wanted to say something before I go home. I understand that you don't really like me right now. I was stupid and I did a lot of stupid things, but I didn't send that card and I didn't sleep with him. And I absolutely don't want a divorce." April remained silent as Paul considered her words. When he didn't answer, she finally said, "I'll go back to my parents for the kids. When do you want to see us?" Paul, almost exhausted, said, "I can't let you come back now. You're as tired as I am, so it's not safe. You might want to use the spare room, as children need a father and mother, preferably living harmoniously in the same place. Home. Tomorrow we will go pick up the children together. We will have a lot of time to talk in the car, so we can discuss this tomorrow." April felt mixed emotions. Anxiety because this wasn't going to be an easy conversation, and relief that she wouldn't have to make another long drive back. She said, "I'd like that. I'm really very tired and hungry." Paul, also hungry because his dinner preparations had been interrupted by the police, replied, "I can cook something quickly, I think." A quick late dinner turned into an impromptu salad with toasted bread, which made April cry. How could I let this happen? Why didn't I talk to him? When did I stop doing this? I hurt my husband so much with a misunderstanding and subsequent behavior that he wanted to divorce me. And even now he receives me at his home. Suddenly April was struck by a shocking thought. Crap, he's divorcing me. How the hell can I get him to change his mind about this? Paul interrupted her thoughts by saying, "Go to bed, I'll clean up. See you tomorrow." April asked with a quiver in her voice, "I know I have no right to ask, but can I have a nighttime kiss?" Paul looked surprised. "April, why are you doing this? For months, you went to bed without a word when I was home. You ignored me or gave me the cold shoulder when I asked what was wrong. I sent you divorce papers. Kissing you isn't on my bucket list right now, you know." April opened her mouth to say she was sorry and still loved him, but Paul raised his hand and she closed it again. "No, April, we'll talk tomorrow. In the car. Right now I'm too excited, too emotional, and too tired to have a decent conversation. This will end in screaming. Tomorrow, after a good night's rest, breakfast, and a run, I'll be able to talk to you without exploding. I'll have a stiff drink now. You can join if you want, and we can talk about the kids if you like." Finally, she appreciated the depth of Paul's anger towards her. She looked at her hand with the wedding ring. Her eyes became moist. In a quiet voice, she said, "Are you going to drink Dutch gin? If so, I'll take it too." Over the next hour, April told him about the kids, including how they told her off on the way to the zoo. She didn't hold anything back and finished, "If young teenagers are noticing my behavior towards you, it must be bad." It was bad. I'm exhausted and going to bed. April walked into the empty kitchen and automatically poured herself a cup of coffee when she realized that the coffee was ready as usual and her breakfast, oatmeal with soy milk, was in the microwave, ready to be heated. It was so ordinary that she almost choked. Half an hour later, she was reading the newspaper when Paul returned from his morning run. Without another word, he took off his sweaty running jersey, threw it into the laundry basket, and walked through the kitchen into the hallway. April looked at him carefully. The first thing she noticed were the bruises on his torso. She had an idea why they were there. A second glance showed that his musculature had also changed since the last time she had seen him naked. Paul has always been thin. He needed to be like a runner, but now his muscles stood out like ropes, not large, but noticeably prominent. However, as he began to take off his running leggings, she suddenly felt a familiar tingling sensation in her lower abdomen. Damn, I haven't seen him, just his skin, for months. My God, he's so pumped up. Out loud, she said, I see you are practicing Tai Chi again. Paul looked at her and then at his body, as if noticing the bruises for the first time, and replied, It was a mistake to leave that. You look good, Paul. You've changed. It shows, she said. Paul looked wary and replied, You have no idea how much I've changed, April. There was a moment of silence as April pondered his words and Paul continued, Speaking of changes, I'm going to go take a shower and then we can go. April nodded absently, still thinking about Paul's words and what she should say to him in the car. For practical reasons, they decided to take Paul's car. They haven't spoken again since they discussed this morning and decided to take the RAV4. The hybrid was larger and much more convenient for traveling to and from April's parents. As soon as they got onto the highway, Paul asked, Why were you at the police station yesterday? I asked your father to get a lawyer. Because I'm the one who hit Charles below the belt, pepper sprayed him and broke his nose. It wasn't until at the police station that your lawyer beat me to it with testimony from heavy air cargo transports that you were at work at the time he claimed you were his. Beat up. April smiled, remembering the groans of the broken marriage destroyer. Her thoughts were interrupted by Paul's next question. Were you going to take full responsibility for his accusations? This load, as you called it, wouldn't be as bad as you think. He tried to have sex with me, and I defended myself. By the way, I may have provoked him a little, but it doesn't show on the evidence, which I have. So what now? What are you going to do about it? April's response was immediate. I'll file a criminal complaint. Your lawyer has already agreed to represent me. That and everything my dad has collected for this scumbag is going to give him a very, very hard time. Paul smiled grimly. Nothing better could have happened to this guy. April took a deep breath and decided, Paul, what about us? What do you mean, what about us? Paul answered. I know I treated you badly, very badly. Then I was stupid and forgot how hard you worked for our marriage and our family. Don't tell me. I was there, you know. But if you were so unhappy, why didn't you talk to me? Am I an indifferent monster? I'm still wondering where I went wrong. April began to cry as she half sobbed and exclaimed, No, you didn't do anything wrong. Oh yes, part of this trouble was because I worked too long and too hard. Sometimes I could and should have given up on my boss. My only excuse was that I knew someone was leaving and I had a chance to take his place, so I did everything possible to get promoted. He paused before adding bitterly, and it cost me my marriage. No, please let me tell you where I really went wrong and ruined everything we had. Please, Paul, I'm so sorry for what I did. I know it's not enough, but please let me explain. Paul looked to the side to check how April was coping and saw that she was very upset and on the verge of tears. He said gently, Hey, put your hands behind your head and take a few deep breaths. Tell me when you're ready. We still have an hour-and-a-half drive to get to your parents. April did as she was told and started 5 minutes later. It was a little stuttering at first, but soon the words came pouring out. I was already annoyed that you worked so much, especially on the evening shifts. I was always left alone with the kids for dinner. That's where the problem started. You did all the grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning before leaving for work. I said this, quite proudly, to one friend, but she told me everything, and it came back to me. April the fool, doing all the housework, it sounded like a radio commercial. They didn't see me coming home and taking care of the kids alone when you worked the evening shift, an empty bed when you worked the night shift. Then the pandemic hit, and suddenly it seemed like you had to work every day, for hours, including double duty. Thanksgiving shift. Paul started to say something, but April stopped him with a hand gesture. She continued, "When you told me you had to work on holidays too, it was almost too much. I went to my parents, left the children there, and went shopping. I had a coffee somewhere. Charles saw me and asked why I looked so dejected. We started talking, and over the next weeks, he gradually broke down my defenses and slowly made me doubt you. He convinced me that you were cheating on me. Remember how I called you when you were on the platform and managing the emergency under a cargo plane?" Paul nodded and said, "And it took me a long time to call you back. I should have known better. Dad told me in great detail that you couldn't leave the airport without checking in, and it was always reflected in your salary." Paul was silent, and after a while April began again. "That's when Charles grabbed me. I swear I didn't sleep with him, although it was close. If Mom hadn't caught me kissing." She left the sentence unfinished. Paul's hands turned white on the steering wheel. April put her hand on the sleeve of his sweater. "Paul, I swear, I will do anything to get back the man I left behind when I lost myself. I've done things that can only pass a Clinton-style marital fidelity test, and I'm sorry. I'm really your spoiled, stupid wife, but I want to remain your wife without the spoiled and stupid part. I'm already looking for a consultant to work on the stupid and spoiled part." This information was new to Paul, and he asked, "Who suggested this to you? Your parents?" "No, actually May and Thomas. They straight up said I was crazy for treating you this way and told me to get my head checked. I decided they were right." "Okay, April, now the $64 million question. What do you want?" asked Paul. "Do I really need to answer this question?" "Yes, you should. I'm not going to assume anything. You treated me disgustingly. You practically cheated on me, and if you hadn't been caught and stopped, you would have ended up in bed with that man. So tell me, April, what do you want and what do you expect from me?" April looked at Paul. She had never seen him so straight. Paul always took a diplomatic approach. She took a moment to find the best way to articulate her desires. "I want to be your wife. Forever. I want to be part of a happy family that includes you. I desperately want back the man I left behind when I lost myself," she finally answered. As soon as the words left her mouth, Paul almost growled, "April, that's not going to happen." Frightened now, April choked. "I definitely don't want a divorce, but I understand if you think my behavior was too much, and if you insist on a divorce, I won't resist. But please, Paul, I swear that card was not my idea, and I would never have allowed Charles to send it." Hearing the trembling in her voice, Paul's tone softened a little. "That's not what I meant. I seriously thought about it myself and came to the conclusion that in addition to working too hard and neglecting you, I always gave in to your demands. I had to work so hard to satisfy your desires, and in this process I crossed my own boundaries. I went too far. I decided that it would end now, as you may have noticed. Another change, I got a promotion. Now I have a different job. This job means that I will work 4 days a week for 9.5 hours. And once a month, I will have a day off according to the duty schedule. No more evening or night shifts. So I'm not sure that you see the same person in front of you that you left months ago when you moved away from me. And I'm not going back to the old one." "You got a promotion? I didn't know," April responded in surprise. "I wanted to tell you, but you weren't there, remember? And when I wanted to tell you that I was applying for a promotion, you didn't want to talk to me, remember that too? I wanted to tell you that you need to be a little more patient, but you left and found comfort and understanding in another man. Suddenly I was practically useless, even unnecessary," Paul countered with the venom returning in his voice. Startled by the harsh response and the frustration she detected in his voice, she nodded, realizing that she was the one who had caused it. So she decided to bring it up before asking about the possibility of reconciliation. After a deep sigh, she said, "You're absolutely right. I really was a bitch to you in the beginning, and I was really stupid for letting that bastard get me. I know I can be better." Paul took a deep breath, looked at the mother of his children and his wife of officially 15 years, but in reality just under a year. Then he looked at the road again and said, "I made a vow. I remember something like, for good and for evil, for richer and for poorer, in health and in sickness, until death do us part. I will love and respect you all the days of my life." He looked back at April for a second before continuing. "That's the hard part we're talking about. I don't take that vow lightly, unlike the woman I once loved with all my heart." April swallowed a lump when she heard firm, but alas, such true words from her husband. She felt an icy void form in her stomach. The thought of refusal slipped through her instincts. She was convinced that there would be a refusal. She started to get lost in thoughts. Where should I live? What will I tell the children? Will I be able to raise them without Paul's constant presence? Oh shit, will they stay with me? Wait, what did he say? Sorry, Paul, can you repeat that? I was panicking and wasn't paying enough attention. Sorry. I said, that's the hard part. Now, if I had walked away and filed for divorce the first time we had a serious problem in our time together, I would have been no better than you when you started to pull away from me. I decided that we should try to stay together if that's what you want. April was so convinced that this was the end that she couldn't switch gears so quickly. One minute she was thinking about a disastrous divorce because of her stupidity and the prenup, and the next she heard that she still had a chance to save her marriage. She felt deep relief, and as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her heart. She grabbed his hand, but immediately realized her mistake when the car suddenly skidded. Luckily, the road was empty because they brutally crossed into the oncoming lane. "Carefully," Paul shouted as he tried to get the car back on the track. April laughed nervously. "Just like in our marriage, I need my husband to get me back on track. You won't regret this. Paul, I swear." "Don't make any assumptions. I'm not getting into this without some kind of agreement on how we're going to do it, and you might not like it. I think it would be best to discuss this in front of your parents." "My parents? Why?" "Because they're already involved. Your mom put too much pressure on me to give you another chance. Then I already kicked them out for manipulating me during that phone call when I promised to think about you and the kids came back. She cornered me and I was furious with her for it." April thought about Paul's words. "That's why they came home so suddenly. I understand now. I'm sorry." The rest of the journey was silent, but music was playing from the radio. Paul parked the RAV4 in front of his in-laws' house. Before he could even get out of the car, the door swung open and May ran out to meet him, shouting, "Dad, Thomas, Lindsay, Daddy's here," and she threw herself into his arms. Thomas ran out after her and flew into the arms of the others. Lindsay soon followed. When they finally finished hugging, they went inside, where Thomas fired off his verbal torpedo. "Does this mean you won't divorce Mom?" The four adults were dumbfounded and exclaimed in unison, "What?" May snorted, "Yes, of course. As if we are fools. Mom and Dad don't talk to each other for months because Mom ignores or makes fun of Dad. And then suddenly we live here and Mom is seeing another man who we have to call Uncle Charles." There was silence in the room until April said, "Yes, I was very stupid. Your father and I have a lot to talk about, and I hope to convince him that this was the first and last time. I learned a very important lesson, and you taught me part of it." She walked over and hugged her children, asking, "Please forgive me and help me." Late that afternoon, while Lindsay was playing at the neighbor's house and the older two were upstairs, the two couples sat down at the table. "It's time to talk," Paul said, not without some weariness. "Can I start?" asked April. "The table is yours. Continue." "Dear Paul, I know I could say sorry a million times, but that wouldn't be enough, so I'll say it once and not waste your time. I'm sorry. Paul, And the only thing I can add is that I will try my best to earn your trust again. I really want to get back the person I was before I started messing things up." Paul looked at April. "For the record, I already said this in the car, and I will say it again here in front of your parents. It will not happen again." June and Jack winced in shock, but Paul continued inexorably, "I will no longer bend over backwards to satisfy your every need. I've pushed my limits too far, and it won't happen again. In other words, you are now sitting across from another person." June chimed in, "Does that mean you're leaving?" To which Paul immediately replied, "No, I will really try to save our marriage, but April must win my heart again. A lot of love was burned because of her tricks and this adventure with another man. Understand, there is still love left, but I do this mainly out of a sense of duty and love for the children." April lowered her head. This is truly a different Paul, a different person that I knew. He had never been so outspoken. Will I be able to make this person love me again? Paul continued, "The divorce will be final in about 5 months. At the end of this period, we will see if we can tolerate each other, if we want to keep trying. If not, I won't stop the procedure, so you better hire a lawyer." April's parents looked amazed, and April herself was pale, looking at her husband, who continued to move inexorably forward. "Now about the logistics. I'm still working on schedule. 4 days a week from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. with an hour-and-a-half break. Once a month, I have a weekend shift, also from 6 to 4. Basically, I don't work overtime, so I'll always be home at 5:30, Paul continued. He sighed because now he had come to the hardest part. "For now, you will sleep in the guest room until we decide that we will become a couple again. If we do. Also, from now on, I will continue to do what I started when you disappeared." When she looked at him with a questioning look, he added, "Things like Tai Chi. I'm going to teach this to kids too, so they can defend themselves." April felt some relief beyond the mention of them sleeping in separate rooms and nodded, encouraging Paul to continue. "April, I promise that I will make serious efforts to reconcile, but I must warn you, if I feel that you are moving away again, I will ask questions and we will have a good talk about it. If you try to turn your back on me again, we're done and you'll get a one-way ticket to your parents." April looked thoughtful before answering. "Dear Paul, yes, you are very dear to me, although I understand that it is difficult for you to believe it. After my parents and May and Thomas almost tore my head off, I realized that I had lost my sense of reality. So I promise from the bottom of my heart that I will work on our marriage as hard as you do. Maybe even harder, because I have a lot of things to fix that I've messed up. And, Paul, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to show that from now on, I will be the loving wife I promised to be in our marriage vows." Paul looked April in the eyes and saw that she was truly repentant. She met his gaze with wet, reddened eyes from tears. "Okay," he said, "let's start rebuilding our future. Please call the kids and load the car. We are coming home." April went upstairs and Paul turned to June. "June, don't ever back me into a corner or interfere with me again. Give April some advice, but leave me alone. Yesterday, I almost said some things that I'm sure I would regret if I said them out loud." "Yes, Paul," June replied humbly. "I'll try, and Jack will help me. He also said something to me in the car after you kicked us out." A few hours later, Paul was busy unloading trucks at the house. The children ran around the house, cheerfully and joyfully, rejoicing at returning home. Late that evening, as both adults sat tired, each on their own side of the sofa, Paul asked, "Is there anything you would like to do, us, together with the children?" April's head snapped in his direction, as if the brains in her skull had almost moved a quarter of an inch. "Do you not work? Today was your day off, wasn't it? You better get used to it. I now work 4 days a week from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m., plus 1 weekend a month. This means that I will be at home much more often. Think about it. In the meantime, I'm going to bed." He headed upstairs when April called out to him. She came and stood in front of him and said, "Yes, I like your new schedule. I think I'll really like it. And I would really like to have a picnic by the lake and rent a canoe. Oh, and also, I'd like to make a deal with you." "Okay, what are we talking about?" "So that we never leave. For example, we don't go to bed without saying goodbye, and when someone returns, we say hello. Can we do this?" "I completely agree. Somewhere along the way we lost that, and it's not good." April leaned over and kissed him on the lips, quietly whispering, "Thank you for giving me another chance. I love you. Good night and sleep well." She walked upstairs, leaving a stunned Paul to watch as she swayed her hips seductively as she walked away. A few months later, April was with her parents, and Paul was away with May, Thomas, and Lindsay for the weekend to practice Tai Chi. He insisted that they should learn to defend themselves, and they liked it, especially Lindsay, who took to it like a duck to water. The past few months have been difficult for Paul and April. Counseling revealed many frustrations festering in both of them. Working shifts were a way of life for Paul, but in April they took a heavy toll, leaving her feeling like a sailor. She was alone with the kids and lonely, but now Paul was home more and had a regular schedule, so it was hard for her to get used to it. April sat with her mother in front of the ice cream parlor and caught up on the latest events. She told June about Charles Marsh's trial, in which he was found guilty and sentenced to 6 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. He was also given a restraining order banning him from any contact with the Fowler family. "That's good, honey. So, how are things between you and Paul?" June asked her daughter. "I don't know," April replied. "Mostly everything is pretty calm. Paul behaves almost the same way as I was used to before." "Almost?" June asked, raising her eyebrows. April looked at her clenched fists. "Why is it so difficult to talk about this, even with my mother?" This did not go unnoticed by June, who gently encouraged, "I am your mother, dear. You need someone to talk to, so it might as well be me. Tell me what's missing." April sighed, not wanting to admit it, but needing it at the same time. "Intimacy, Mom, that's what's missing. No hugs, no kisses, nothing. We have a completely platonic marriage. I do not know what to do." "What do you mean? Doesn't he take the initiative or let you touch him at all?" asked June. "No initiative. I can hug him, but it feels like I'm hugging a rubber doll. He just doesn't reciprocate." "Are you not getting any reaction?" April remembered and said, "Yes, an involuntary reaction, like last week. I hugged him tightly because he helped me write a resume for a job, and thanks to that, I got the job. I was so happy that I jumped into his arms, and I felt how excited he was when I pressed my pelvis against him. But then he patted me on the shoulder, congratulated me, and left, of course, with the children at home, but a little kissing was quite possible." "Do you have a job?" "How amazing. What kind of work, and when do you start?" "Monday, next week. At school, in the media library as an assistant librarian. 25 hours a week, paid school holidays, Social Security, and my own health insurance. It's nowhere near what Paul brings, but it all helps." "Paul didn't mind?" "No, he encouraged it. He said that maybe part of the problem was my self-esteem because I was at home all the time and he was only working. It's not that he ignores me all the time. On the physical side, I have a caring, witty, and supportive husband back. I'm only afraid that if we miss the physical side of our marriage, he'll let the divorce go through and I won't deny him anything. I crave his touch, but Paul shows no initiative." June thought for a moment. "April, I think you're thinking about this the wrong way. You want Paul to claim you as his wife again sexually, right?" April looked down at her hands again and whispered, "Yes, that's what I was hoping for." "What if Paul thinks you're the one who pushed him away, and now it's up to you to take the initiative to get him to do his manly duties again?" "You think so?" "Oh yeah, if I were you, I would obviously rip his pants off." "How am I going to do this?" June grinned. We're going to do some shopping first. Secondly, the children will stay here for the weekend. They haven't stayed overnight for a long time. We'll come and pick them up next Friday after school. April's face showed doubt, but June wasn't over yet. When you're alone with him, you lash out. You serve him dinner. Let's say sushi. Paul loves good sushi, and you have to serve it to him with chopsticks in his mouth. When he takes the third one you give him, the next one between your lips. Now April was starting to get excited about the idea. I like it. What should I wear? June grinned like a Cheshire catty have it. Paul no longer has a chance. With any luck, she'll get him back, and I'll keep my precious son-in-law. Do you remember what you were wearing when I caught you near the house? You mean that tight blouse? I can't wear it with Paul anymore. I feel like I've desecrated it. That's why we're going shopping this week. You need clothes and underwear for Thursday, Friday, and the weekend. Thursday. Make sure he sees you before he goes to work. I know it's early, and if you do it suddenly on Thursday, he'll be suspicious. So start on Monday. Be ready for breakfast when he gets out of bed. You can always tell him that you want to come early because you need to do some things around the house before you go to work. So you want to get used to Paul getting up so early, like 4:45, not as entit. Yes, I can do that, she said, smiling. Thursday morning, 4:45 am. Paul was getting used to the idea of him and April having breakfast together, and he was loving it. He walked into the kitchen and his jaw dropped. April stood there, dressed in an incredibly sexy dress. Silky and sticky, it almost looked like her breasts were free in it, but when he looked at them, he noticed that their bounce was somewhat limited. The dress fell just above her knees, revealing silky stockings, but, oddly enough, her feet were in comfortable slippers. You look amazing, he complimented her. On what occasion did you make yourself so beautiful? April beamed at his compliment and smiled happily, replying, You're a reason. This is just a foretaste of what's to come. This weekend the children will be with my parents, and I will come for you. Paul was stunned by this statement. He blushed and felt the blood filling his little head. This is true, he replied, confused but also excited. Yeah, she breathed. I want to go back to bed with the man I love, the man I loved even more after he allowed me to stay at his house after my terrible behavior and stupidity. I want the man I married back, but what I want even more is the man he has become. With these words, April walked up and kissed him on the lips. What's going on here? Am I ambushed? Or what? Questions and doubts swirled in Paul's head. Despite the invitation, Paul somehow couldn't bring himself to invite April back into their marital bed. He felt like a fool, but he was just as mentally paralyzed as he had been after receiving that fateful postcard. Now he needed to take the initiative. He needed to decide whether he definitely wanted to stay married to April or divorce her. Paul received another quick, soft kiss on the lips before he swung his leg over the saddle of his bike. Fuck you. I need to dress more decently before the kids wake up, April said with a seductive smile on her lips. On the bike, Paul had time to think about this development. As he turned onto the bike path that marked the final miles to his work, he realized he needed a little more time. His work schedule required at least one operations manager to be present per day. On weekdays, there were usually two, one for daily work and another for meetings and other things that went along with that function. Luckily for Paul, a colleague showed up at 8, giving him the opportunity he had been considering. After some thought, Paul took some overtime and texted April that he would be home at 10:30 because he needed time to think and run around in the woods for a few hours to clear his head. April became worried after Paul's message. Should she have kept her mouth shut about her plans? She wasn't sure, but Paul didn't like being pressured. That's why she announced her plan in advance. She shrugged, thinking, the genie is out of the bottle, and there's no getting him back. Later that morning, while Paul was in his room changing into his running clothes, April came in to see him off. She wanted to wish him luck and tell him that she loved him. She wanted to say that she still regretted the mess they were in and hoped he had a good run. She looked at her husband. He looked good in his early 40s. Gray hair at the temples, broad shoulders, especially since he started practicing Tai Chi again, narrow waist. She sighed, forgetting that Paul wore special underwear for running. He unceremoniously discarded his boxers, preparing to get dressed. Naked, he was a spectacle for the eyes. Like a 20-year-old, she thought. Stone, with a large hole on the sides. There was not an ounce of fat on his body. His muscles flexed with his every movement, more like a gymnast than a weightlifter. It took her a lot of effort not to lunge at him right there and take him into her arms. I can't do this. Bye. If he takes it the wrong way, it will all be over. But I can tell him. April cleared her throat and said, in a slightly hoarse voice, God, you're so good. You are beautiful, inside and out. Paul blushed deeply, which made April laugh like a schoolgirl. After a few seconds, the tension dissipated and both began laughing loudly. Paul had a good run. He decided that April should pursue him and seduce him for her own self-esteem. He concluded that otherwise she would always feel some guilt. Before this happened, he thought about something he had read in a story some time ago. There was a question, are you a better person with or without a wife? He thought about this for an hour while running at full speed along a bike path in the forest. He remembered a few weeks when he was alone, and it was time before April's discontent began, and the answer came to his mind in a bright flash. Now he knew what to do. Friday morning was not much different from Thursday morning. April was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when Paul arrived, but this time she was wearing a silk robe tied loosely around her waist. The dress fell open as April rummaged around in the kitchen, and when she poured the coffee, Paul looked at no one but her, because under the robe April was completely naked. April noticed Paul's gaze, causing her to smile, but another sudden reaction from her body almost overwhelmed her. She said hoarsely, I'll go upstairs and take a cold shower. Otherwise, you will be absent today without permission, and the children will see something they never wanted to witness. She kissed him deeply, running her tongue quickly across his lips, and hurried to the bathroom, leaving a confused and painfully aroused Paul behind. He forced himself to calm down, had breakfast, and went to the airport for work. That day, he returned home early again. When he got off his bike and walked inside, he was greeted by April with tears streaming down her cheeks. She threw herself into his arms and cried, You bought me flowers. You made me so happy. Paul calmly asked, So they've already been delivered? He knew full well that the order had to be delivered in 2 hours, and he planned to be home around 15's. Anyway, I figured you were up to something, so I thought it best to try to get on your side. Mom and Dad were here this morning to pick up the kids' things and do some shopping, and they'll pick the kids up straight from school. That's good because now I'm a mess. But what a beautiful mess you are, Paul replied with a smile. You are a fool, Paul Fowler. But darling, I ordered sushi for today. You're not allowed to do anything tonight, except maybe for the end of the evening. She chuckled. I ordered sushi for dinner. You don't have to do anything tonight, except maybe by the end of the evening. She laughed. They had a good evening together, except for the small part where Charles Marsh's role in their problems and April's guilt came up. With a quiver in her voice, she said, Dear Paul, I cannot express how grateful I am for you to have another chance. What I did was wrong to you, our marriage, and our family. The clever manipulator took advantage of this and put enough doubt in my head to allow him to do it. He made a fool out of me and forced me to destroy our marriage with my own hands. I admit I was stupid, but luckily fate intervened and you, being the wonderful person you always were, gave me and our marriage a second chance. I've left our marriage in shambles, but let's use this as a foundation to build something new and stronger. When she finished her confession, she pulled his head down and kissed him softly on the lips, saying, Yes, I was a fool, But I won't be again. I'm yours if you still want me. From now on, I will be your angel in public and your slut in the privacy of our home when the children are not at home. Because of my naivety and stupidity, I almost lost the most precious thing I have. A man who cares about everything I am and will be. Paul, from the bottom of my heart and from the depths of my soul, I love you more than anything, with the possible exception of the children, and I still cannot express how sorry I am for putting you through all of this. Now it was Paul's turn. April, you really hurt me badly, but it wasn't all your fault. I worked too hard for too long. I didn't take into account that you were missing another adult in the family and only focused on getting a promotion. You volunteering at the school and my terrible work hours. We missed out on too much time together and weren't able to reconnect when we were together because there were always the kids. I apologize for this just as much as you ask me. April stammered. Does that mean? Does this mean you want me back? Paul smiled and said, You never left. I have seriously reflected on myself and come to what I just told you, and more importantly, I am convinced that I am a better person with you than without you. Before ordering the flowers, I called my lawyer to tell him to withdraw the divorce petition. I hope you will accept me again. April showered Paul with kisses, and as they were both gasping for breath on the couch, she asked, Does that answer your question? I'm not completely convinced yet. Can we repeat it to be sure? April now had a devilish smile on her face as she whispered, Not now. I have plans for tonight. But I'd like to have a drink now. I need a drink to get ready. If so, I need more than two. No, I need you to be calm and relaxed. Leave the rest to me. With these words, April disappeared into the kitchen. After a while, April called softly from the doorway, Paul, dinner is served. Paul looked up from his book, and his jaw dropped again. April changed her clothes, wearing a skirt and blouse that flirtatiously emphasized her cleavage. The skirt was wide and ended just below the knees, and the blouse was white and, among other things, revealed the absence of a bra. God, you look stunning, sexy, and gorgeous. May I introduce myself? April smiled nervously. I planned to seduce you so I could become your wife again, but you outwitted me. I'm still sticking with the rest of the plan just to show how grateful I am that you're still my husband. April walked up to Paul, gave him a soft kiss and said, Here are the rules. You will sit on this chair, and I will feed you. You are not allowed to do anything without my permission. She kissed him again, asking, Please agree. Paul sat down in his chair and sighed in agreement. April quickly placed the sushi tray behind him on the table and poured 2 small cups of warm sake. After dinner, they had sex. In the next morning, April woke up feeling wonderful. She still felt a tingle from the effort Paul had put in just a few hours ago. She looked at her husband, her lover, and the father of her children with admiration and love. Now, with the morning light streaming through the gap in the curtains, April realized that she was alone in bed. Secretly, she was glad. After the last night of love, she was afraid that she would barely be able to get up and go to the shower. Feeling pain, her muscles aching, she carefully swung her legs over the edge of the bed, thinking that Paul's condition was obviously much better than hers. He's probably already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. A little later, feeling a little refreshed, she staggered into the kitchen and hugged him from behind. She gently stroked his groin, causing Paul to say, God, woman, you are insatiable. Do you want to kill me? April laughed cheerfully. Oh, no. If you enter me now, I will break in half. After sitting her down at the table, Paul poured April some coffee and asked, Do you still want to move in today? April answered happily, No, you kept your promise. You've worn me out. Great, said Paul. We have one day together. Let's make it memorable. We have a lot to talk about. Did you wake up? After your cup of coffee, who wouldn't wake up? What do you think about seeking help? A consultant to speed up our reconciliation. It's better than yelling at each other at home, or worse, stopping talking altogether. April looked at her husband with love in her eyes. Yes, 3 times yes, dear Paul. That idiot called you a fool when I was a real fool. I also called you a fool, but now I'm glad that you are such a fool that you gave me another chance. That makes you my fool, Fool April, and I will never forget it. In a year. Mom, what are you doing? You've been busy all day. Baking a cake, cooking Daddy's favorite food, and you're dressed like you're going to a party, May asked her mother. Not that May was complaining. Her father's favorite food was also her favorite food. April looked at her daughter and smiled, seeing the perfect combination of herself and her husband in the answer. Do you remember the difficulties Dad and I had a year ago? Please don't remind me. Mom, Thomas and I were so afraid that you would get divorced. Yes, honey, I'm still sorry for the pain I caused you. But that man sent Dad a funeral card as an April Fool's Day joke, and he almost ruined our marriage. The only thing that kept Dad and I together was a sense of duty to you, your brother and sister, to keep his promises and the last remnants of love he had for me. Now we are together again and in love again, so I decided to celebrate it. I understand that, but why today? April thought for a few moments about how to formulate her answer. Charles Marsh called your father a fool. I did too, and some other people said the same thing after we made up, simply because he took me back after my stupid actions. However, today is not just April Fool's Day for us. Let's celebrate April Fool's Day. If people want to call Paul a fool, that's fine with me, as long as he's my fool, and I love him so much for that. May nodded. Mom, let me help you End. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.